Welcome to RevOps Revolution, where we focus on changing the game for driving revenue. I'm your host, Jesse Morris, and each episode we take a look at the different areas that affect change and drive revenue across your organization. If this is your first time joining us, please subscribe so you don't miss out on any future episode. Here's to the revolution. Welcome to another day of the revolution. I am your host, Jesse Morris. And today I'm excited. I've got one of my friends and colleagues here, Emma. Emma and I met, a couple years ago through Pavilion. We both live in Colorado, so actually probably about 30 minutes away from each other. She's been a sales leader for the last 15 years or so in the space, and currently leading sales for a workplace productivity software company. Emma, super excited to have you. Welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, thanks, Jesse. Thanks for having me.
Cool. Do you mind telling us a little bit more about yourself?
Yeah. So where to start? In terms of my background, I've been in sales and sales leadership for the last 15 years or so. I think one of the questions you had me think about was how did I get here? How did I get into sales in the first place? And the first story that popped into my mind was a story of when I was selling Girl Scout cookies when I was like 8 years old. My parents instilled some really good qualities in me in a young age that I think have shaped sort of who I am, both personally and professionally today. But anyway, I was selling Girl Scout cookies. All my other friends' parents would bring the Girl Scout cookies to like their dad's office, and that person would just hand out a bunch of cookies, and they would get, money easily from their parents kind of selling their cookies for them. My parents made me go door to door, like normal Girl Scouts, but also role play ahead of time. So I distinctly remember like standing in our old kitchen. We had one of those like kind of swinging doors. And I would stand on one side, my dad would stand on the other, and I would knock. And so he would pretend to be the customer and open the door and say, oh, like, what are you selling? And so I'd talk to him about the Girl Scout cookies and why I liked them and the differences for each brand. And then he would give me like an objection, right? So like, I can't buy these because I'm diabetic. And I'm like, oh, well, did you know we just came out with a sugar-free option? Like this would be perfect for you. And so that's a little glimpse into like my upbringing as a child and my training in like sales and role playing from a really young age. Then I went to college. I was a chemistry major in undergrad. For my first couple of years, I thought I wanted to go to med school. And I just wasn't super passionate about it. Science was something I was good at in high school, and I figured, why not continue? Like, you have to select a major when you're 17, and I'm like, I don't know, I guess chemistry sounds good. And I ended up switching my major over to communications. I had an internship in an HR department in between my junior and senior year, downtown Chicago, where I'm from, at a bank. And this is no knock on anybody in HR, but I hated it. Like the time could not have gone any slower. And I just remember thinking like, man, I think this is what life's going to be like. I'm just going to be, watching the clock every day, wishing, it was 5 o'clock and I could go home because I was so bored and uninspired by the work that I was doing. Anyway, I made it to my first job at a company called Aerotech. Kind of by happenstance, I had a friend who was a year older than I was who worked there, and he loved it. And it was in a role as a recruiter, which was kind of like an entry-level BDR. Like you hired a recent grad who had some grit and perseverance and a desire to win and was an achiever at heart, and put them in this recruiter job. And for me, that was like the light bulb went off. Like it was the first time I really thought, I can't really believe I'm getting paid for this. Like this is super fun. I love it. Like the harder that I work, the more money I can make, the more successful I am. And it was the first job I ever had where I felt like, I could really control my destiny, and I felt like I was really using my strengths. So fast forward 15 years, I was in recruiting, and then I was in outside sales for 5 years, driving all over the state of Illinois. Selling our recruiting services. My territory changed multiple times, and Had a lot of fun doing that. And then I led a team there. First big leadership job that I had. I was leading a team of like 45 or 50 people. Pretty underqualified for that role at the time that I was given it. Um, and then went on to be the VP of sales at a company called Built-in. Um, worked there for about 5 years, saw a ton of growth at that organization. And now I'm at FormStack as the SVP of sales, leading sales, customer success, and revenue operations.
That's awesome. And it's cool to see the story and the evolution. I'm curious, like your parents, were they in sales at all? Like, is there a reason that they had this idea of like role playing and overcoming objections with you?
So my dad, yeah, my dad is a coach. So that's what he does for a living. He started his own company. He's very entrepreneurial. He's a solopreneur. He started his own company. It's called the Joy Group, and it's been around for 25 plus years. Um, and so, yeah, so he was kind of a coach. He was always great at coaching me through how to figure things out. And then my mom was in sales. She was actually in medical sales for a number of years. And then she went back to medical school when, I was in high school and changed career paths and became a physician assistant and really showed me that like doesn't age doesn't define anything. Like you can do whatever you want when you want to, as long as you put your mind to it. And I will say I think the way that I persevere through problems today comes from the way that I was raised. They were very much like, we'll coach you how to get through this. We're not going to fix it for you or tell you what to do. Um, other small examples, like I remember in sixth grade, I didn't get into this language. Like I wanted to take French and you had to qualify for it. And I forget why, but I didn't qualify for it. And I was devastated. And, instead of kind of, I don't want to say normal parents, but other people's parents who would maybe go to the principal and say, hey, I think you made a mistake here. Like Emma would like to take French. They always said like, okay, so what are you going to do about it? And I'm like, well, I don't know. You're like, well, you might be able to change their mind. And so I ended up writing a paper, which is probably not necessary. The principal, I'm sure, was like, oh, okay, this is way overkill. But I ended up writing a persuasive essay as to why I should be included in the French program. And they changed the list, And so I think it just taught me this ability to say, like, everyone's going to have setbacks. You're always going to have challenges. You can choose to not do anything about it if you don't want to, but you also mostly can try to do something about it. Like you are in control. So what can you do to solve it? And so yeah, it's a little background on them.
That's really cool. And I think like I'm guessing as you think about, you're kind of hinting at this, but when you think about some of the successes you've had in sales, I'm sure a lot of it comes from some of those things early on that you did learn. And you talked a little bit, you hit on the word, one of my favorite words in sales, which is grit. Talk a little bit, like I'm curious when you think back over the last 15 years in sales, like what are some of those, I would say, defining moments where you feel like you really had to overcome or kind of like the example you just gave where like maybe it was a setback or maybe it was like you had to reframe your mind. Like, do you have any, I'm kind of putting you on the spot here, but do you have any examples around that of those pivotal moments?
Yeah, I just actually told this story recently to my team. So there's several of these. Like I could give you like 6 or 7 examples. Um, and they're more pivotal moments. Like what do you do during that moment in time that I remember the most? So I don't remember what year, like maybe 2018-ish, 2019. I started at Built-in. So I had been at my first company for 8.5 years. I started at Built-in, which is an HR technology organization, great company. And I started as the director of sales. So I had a small-ish team. It was like 8 to 10 people or so. And I was leading the team directly. We were interviewing for a VP of sales to come in and be my boss. And I remember thinking, like, I was going through the interviews with these folks, and like, I didn't think they were that much better than me. Like, if I'm going to work for somebody, I want to feel like, well, you can teach me something, and like, you're really qualified for this role. I'm going to be reporting to you. And I felt like most people were maybe a marginal step up from where I was, but not that much more skilled than where I was at. And so I remember after going through, like probably a month or two of interviews, and my CEO at the time was nice enough to let me be a part of the interview process and help decide who my new boss would be. But I remember I stopped her after work one night and I said, "What would you think if I did this? Like, do you think I'm qualified?" And she's like, I've been thinking about that. Like, let me give that some thought and I'll come back to you with an answer tomorrow. Anyway, fast forward, I got an interview like with the board, like the next day or, 2 days later. She's like, "Okay, let's do it." And so I'm like freaking out. I'm like, "Oh my God, okay, I didn't think this would happen so quickly." I had to put together a whole deck and all these things. Fast forward later, I got the job, which was great. But I remember really quickly the difference of the expectation of me between director and VP was really big. Like overnight, I got the job, and the expectation, yeah, the expectation and the activities I was involved in were really different, and I quickly felt over my head, like thrown into the deep end a little bit. Shortly after I got promoted, we started our Series C fundraise. And like I had never even been in front of a board. I had never been a part of a fundraising process. I didn't know what I was saying, like or what I was talking about, and what did the board care to hear. And that's one small example of something that I felt kind of over-indexed on. And so I'm getting to the pivotal moment in a second, but I felt overwhelmed. I went to my boss and said, I said basically, "I don't think I'm doing a good job. Like, I think I'm, a little bit in over my head. Do you have any feedback for me?" And she sort of said the same thing, like, "Well, yeah, I've noticed the same thing. We're gonna have to see how this goes," I think was her exact words. I'm like, "Okay, great." That's not what you want to hear. And so I think the pivotal moment is this piece, which is, you know, you get to choose. Like challenges are always going to happen to you, and you get to choose how you react to those. Things don't just happen to you, you're a part of them, and you get to own the choice that you make. So I could have said, I don't think I can do it. I'm stepping down, I'm quitting, etc. Or you focus on what you can control and you fix it. And so I just doubled down on learning. Like that is my go-to. When I don't know how to do something, I know I'm smart enough to learn it. And so I scheduled, 15 networking coffees like the next 2 weeks. I went with every other VP of sales that would talk to me about like how do they run strategy? How do they show up to the board? What are they thinking about with board deck prep? Have they ever done a fundraising round? Like what challenges did they experience, et cetera. I bought a bunch of books and like I just got better. And so ultimately was with Built-in for almost 5 years and was successful in the VP role, and was in that position for another 4 after I was promoted. But I think that's another like clear instance in my mind where there's so many times throughout your career that either you fail at something or you feel underqualified, and you get to choose what you do with that.
And I love that. And I think, it applies in so many ways in life, right? Not just in work, I think outside of work too. But it is interesting because it's cool because in those moments, I'm sure for you, you'll never forget that because it was a choice, right? You had a choice in that moment of like, probably that day you were feeling a little down and you're like, oh man, my boss doesn't think I'm doing a good job and I don't think I'm doing a good job. And like, what the heck am I doing? Like, let me just lick my wounds and call it a day and go back to, what I'm comfortable at. And then you had that moment probably you can remember where it was like, oh, or you know what, like this is a challenge. Like I love challenges. It's like one of the you talk about learning, and I kind of want to get into that here in a second, but like that type of personality, I think it gets back to that grit, but also just like the curiosity of like, man, I want to better myself. And look, I got given an opportunity here, and I got given feedback to actually go and do something about that, which I think is interesting in life because like we don't always get that opportunity. A lot of times we just fail and it's like your boss doesn't even tell you, right? I've had that happen in my career where 6 months later they're like,
Yeah.
you've been doing this for 6 months, and you're like, oh my gosh, like you could have told me 6 months ago. But I don't know, I always
Yeah.
think about those moments, and I think it's cool because you can actually then like leverage that again in your career later in life because to your point, you always run into challenges. A lot of times we're almost always over our skis at something. If we're doing things right, I feel like there's that like I'm a little bit always,
Yeah.
trying to fit into whatever, trying to continue to grow and grow into whatever I'm doing if we're trying to stretch ourselves. So that's really cool. And I'm sure it's something that you
Yeah.
do oftentimes, like reference back to in your own mind of like, hey, I did this then. Like, why can't I do that now? Right.
Yeah, it's all patterns. Like, and you could sub in any other example like that. Like, and it'll happen to me again, and it'll probably happen to me again after that. And so you start to then get better at, okay, how do I handle this when this happens? And um, if that never happens to you, then you probably aren't really pushing yourself as hard as you could. And in some cases, that might not be the best path for everybody. Like they might say, I don't want that, right? Like I don't want to be in over my skis. I want to do a job that I know how to do, and that's it. And that's a good career path too. But if you if you if you're if you want to move up or if you have a desire to learn, like you're gonna find yourself in those instances more often than not because it's the definition, like you're pushing yourself,
Yeah,
which means you're not 100% qualified all the time for what you're doing. So,
exactly.
yeah.
Talk a little bit like when you think about other revenue leaders, and I think some of the attributes we talked about are I would say a lot of people don't always have those, but like when you think about the things that you do that have set you apart, in your career that, and I don't mean this in like I'm better than them, but I mean this more in like just foundationally, what are some of those things that you're like, as Emma, like these are some of the things that like I want to be known for as a sales leader that I think really like if you're interviewing or whatever, that I think really like sets me, apart from others, or I do this differently, or I think about this differently, or I view these things differently.
Yeah. Couple of things. I think the positive feedback I get from a lot of teams that I've worked with is that I'm very even keel and steady. So even if, whatever that analogy is, like the duck under the pond, so like feet are on the bottom, like going really quick. I try not to be a super emotionally charged leader. Doesn't mean that I can't get excited or that I am like perfect in this um, category, but I try to be pretty even keel and steady and consistent with the team and have a level of focus where people know what we're aiming at. Easier said than done. Like I think it depends on, the company and the stage and the size. I mean, even at Formstack right now, we're trying to do a lot, right? We're trying to sell this existing core product that we have, and we're also trying to create this startup within the organization. Both things need different humans and different skill sets and different needs. And so it's not always easy to do that. But to the best of my ability, I try to be steady. Like, because if you keep changing the expectations, especially in sales, and if you keep changing the goalpost, it's really hard to get repeatable success. And part of why I like sales is that it's not rocket science. Like, doesn't mean that if you're a great seller that you're not great at your job. But at the end of the day, for a really pretty good seller, an average to good seller, it's just about repeatable processes. Like, how do you identify, the right humans to target at the right time with the right messaging, with the right sales process, the right collateral and the product to sell it? And so I try to bring that to the teams that I manage, which is like, let's focus and let's stay really like steady and even keel on our priorities versus flavor of the week. Everything's changing all the time. People get lost and it's hard to create, it's hard to allow people the space to execute if you're changing the goalpost all the time. Second thing I would say that I pride myself on is just transparency and having really good open relationships with my direct reports, meaning transparent feedback both ways. Like, I'll tell you what I think you need to be doing better, and I would love you to give me feedback too. Just because I'm your boss doesn't mean you don't have a say in how this goes. I also have done quite frequently in my career, like open career conversation moments. So the first company that I worked for was such a fear-based leadership style. It's how they taught you to lead. And if you said you wanted to leave, you were excommunicated. Like literally. It was like, okay, if you're not in, you're out. And your last day is tomorrow. And, that wasn't the only version of fear-based leadership that that company embodied, but it was an example of it. And so, guess what? Nobody ever talked about anything besides staying. Like, oh, this place is perfect and we love it. Because if you disagreed, you weren't allowed in the club anymore. And so, when I left that company, I thought to myself, like, this isn't an effective way to lead. It's just not. And so, most people, I don't know the percentage, but 99% of people don't retire from the first company that they work for. They just don't. And that's okay. And so I can name 5 or 6 examples of kind of like open exit plans I've had with leaders who've worked for me, who maybe we've run our course. It's been 3 or 4 really good years, and they're ready for something else. I don't have something else to give them here. Like there's no other job I can give you that's going to help you kind of in my first example, like challenge your next skill set. And so I'm going to go help you find a different role that makes sense for you. And hopefully it's within the organization. But if it's not, then that's okay too. And I've tried really, I think that is somewhat unique of like, I've tried pretty hard to create a level of trust and transparency with the people who work for me that, they can feel comfortable doing that.
So you talked a little bit at the beginning, right, about kind of being the calm in the storm, this even keel leader, which I agree with you. I think is, I think invaluable in a lot of ways, especially I think the more leadership you take on, I'll say it that way. Like the interesting about that is like you choose to work generally in startup environments similar to me, right? Like we both kind of we tend to like uh that smaller size company, right? That small medium sized company. And in the reality of those environments, it's that whole idea, right? It's almost like below the surface. It's that whole idea, like I sit below the water and it's kind of calm, but by up on top, it could be raging, right? And I think a lot of our job as leaders, a lot of times, is like, especially in the types of environments both you and I work in, like it's raging up top, and it is that like, how do I kind of shield my team, for lack of a better word, from that? And to your point, keep focused. Like, how do you feel like you've been able to do that effectively? Um, Within those, I mean, because again, it's almost like, I don't want to say oxymoron, but there is a little bit here where it's like you're talking about keeping your team focused and not changing priorities, where you choose to work in an environment that's like so big on changing priorities. Like, how do you balance those two things?
Right. It sounds kind of like insanity, right? Like try to be steady and even keel and don't change priorities, but also work for a company that's growing and shifting and changing. Like those two things they don't work well together. An interesting story on this. So I remember when I was that first journey I was telling you about my first VP of sales job, and I started networking. So I got in touch with this woman who led a really large global team for a huge organization, like billion-dollar company. And she sat me down. She was like, okay, it all matters on your 3-year plan. We start building out 3-year plans in the fall of the year before. And it was so off base where I was. Like, I'm like, I don't even know like what we're going to be doing next week. Like, I can't build a 3-year plan. Like, you're crazy. Because honestly, you can't do that for that stage and size of a company. It's all those plans would be ripped up. It would be a complete waste of time. So what I try to do to blend like that even keel, steady focus quality with constantly changing, working in startups where that's the environment that you're in, is trying to plan in chunks of and increments of time that make sense based on the company's stage. So right now, I'm talking to the team about how do we not change course through now and end of year, not majorly change course, right? Like where we're going to change things, we're going to iterate, we're going to, play around with different processes. Some are going to work, some aren't. So I'm not talking about changing the little nuanced things like day to day. I'm talking about like the big things that make a difference for our success this year. Can we stay the same for 6 months straight? That's not that long, right? Like at a large company, that would be a laughable amount of time. Like that would be so short that it would be funny. And so I try to compartmentalize, and I did that. I do that in, leadership roles, and I also did that in sales. Like if you think about hitting your quota on an annual basis, it's $1 million quota. That feels insurmountable, feels really big. but there's a lot of days and a lot of weeks and a lot of quarters that you string together to get to that total number. And so a lot of times even as I talk to the sales leaders here, I say, okay, well, what's it going to take for you to win this month? What's it going to take for you to win next month? Now, it doesn't mean that you don't need to also spend time looking up past that time frame, but if you can focus on like the repeatable processes and strategies that you need to be set up for success in 3, 6, 9, 12-month increments, while also keeping a vision for the next 2 to 3 years in mind, that's generally how I try to do it, or to marry those skills.
No, and it makes a lot of sense. And it's like my last company, I would say like kind of played like interim CRO while we were looking for the next sales leader. Um, and I would always talk about like how do you win the week, right? Which in turn wins the month, and in turn wins the quarter, right? So that makes a lot of sense to me. You talked a little bit earlier about learning and like your passion and desire to do that. When you think about today, like I think it's easy to think. I think A, for people that maybe aren't as far along in their career, and B, I do think some people get complacent. So talk to me a little bit. Like you're 15 years now into sales. It'd be easy to sit here and be like, oh, I know most everything, and which I know that's not the case. But I think some people probably have that in their head, either that you figured out, or you're just, I've learned enough, or not even learned enough. I've learned most of what I need to know, and now I can just do it in my sleep. Talk a little bit about today. Like, what are you learning today? What's something that just like you're almost geeking out on, you continue, that drives this passion forward of learning for you?
Yeah, a couple of things. I think I like learning and I lean towards learning. One, because it's in my nature. I like it. Like I was one of those weird people who liked school. Like I liked, the school part of college, not just like the partying part of college. And so I think one, I just naturally lean there. The other is I think I almost do it out of like paranoia. Like if I'm not learning and keeping up, somebody else is, and I'm going to become irrelevant. Like my skill set will become irrelevant if I'm not learning, like all that there is to learn around, with AI. I know we were talking about that earlier. There's so much that we're not doing there that I could be learning and doing differently. So I think that's kind of the why around the learning piece. In terms of what I'm learning, there's a couple of things I'm digging in on. One is AI. I'm again networking with a ton of people, and I was just on an interesting pavilion, like leaders chat. I forget what they call it, coffee chats, virtual. And this one woman is running laps around like what she's doing with AI. And it was like 10 of us on a call, all picking her brain, like, and how does this work? And how does this work? And I'm slacking my RevOps team the whole time. Like, have you heard of this? And, have we thought about doing this way? And so I would say that's one area that I think there's still a lot of unknown for people that when you think about in this economic market, trying to get more efficient in your business, like that, great. That's a massive opportunity to be able to do that. And then the other thing is, I recently took on the churn side of our business, retention, and it's an area that I'm less experienced in. And so I read a book. I texted my old counterpart at Built In and said, how do I do customer success? And she sent me a book. And then
What book?
I've been networking. It's literally called like the customer success playbook or customer success. It's a blue and white cover book.
Okay.
I could look up the author. I will say it's more geared towards the customer success that I'm used to, which is like human centric, running quarterly business reviews, identifying risk early on in an account, getting executive alignment with their decision makers, that sort of thing. The area that I'm less used to is FormSec is a PLG, high volume of customers, generally low dollar amount monthly customer base that takes a whole different skill set. And so same thing, I had a couple networking calls with other like VPs of customer success at specific like identical companies almost to FormSec in terms of revenue and customer count and customer velocity that I learned a ton from. So those are some things I'm learning about right now.
So on the retention side, I think that's an interesting one. And I think for a lot of people, it's obviously A, it's ever evolving, but B, like I think it's hard to solve and I think especially in the PLG world, like you and I've talked about that over lunch before, but talk a little bit like what are some of the things that you feel like you've picked up from, your learning so far and maybe some of the like things you're playing around with or you're testing to try to, impact that capability within the organization, both from a systems perspective and process, but also from a people side of it.
Yeah. So I think what it first started with was diagnosing the problem because when you have that many customers and that many that come in, come out, some are using the product seasonally, it's why they bought it. So the idea that we could retain them over a long course of time is not reasonable, right? So like what is churn that we can avoid versus what is churn that's not avoidable because of how the product is set up. And so we spent even like the last month really dissecting where is the root cause of the problem and how can we diagnose it? And then how can we set up systems and scaled programs that are more of a one-to-many approach? So a couple of things that we saw was, customers, I'd have to pull up the exact percentage, but it's called 40% of new customers that come in that are monthly leave within the first 6 months. Okay. So how do we break that down? Is it because they started and they don't see value early on enough because they don't know how to use the product because the onboarding is not good enough? Or was it just seasonal to begin with? And so we actually broke down customer cohorts with really specific kind of strategies and plays tied to each customer cohort, some of them being digital, like one-to-many strategies. So for example, we're working with the product team on improving our in-app customer onboarding, like what that
Like
looks
joy
like.
rides, like joyride kind of type things,
Yep. Like,
walkthroughs.
yeah, and like walk me through. Yeah, exactly. Yep. And then also creating an actual customer onboarding portal and program, not just like pop-ups inside the application, because the current videos that we offer users are really technical and really long. Probably not something if you're paying $99 a month for forms that you're going to spend time doing. In addition to setting up one-to-many webinar, like onboarding opportunities for you to come in and we could have an SE or a CSM run like a weekly onboarding call that any customer who just recently purchased can join. We don't charge you for it. You can ask any questions that you want. They'll walk you through just like, here's just getting you started pack essentially, right? Of like, here's how to kind of get you set up in the system. And then on the flip side, also looked at, okay, who are our highest paying customers? Our revenue operations team created a customer health score, which we didn't have. And now we've had a quarter to really test it, and it's working great. Like the customer health score works. The higher your health score, the higher your GRR, the lower your health score, the lower your GRR. So, and gross revenue retention. So it's showing that the health score was created with the right logic in mind. And so now we can go use that and actually action it. So for like larger customers that have a low health score, what can we do to get our CEO or CTO or myself on the phone directly with these customers to make sure we understand, where they're having issues and what we can do to resolve it before we come up for renewal. So it's kind of like first starting with customer cohorts and then how do we set up the right strategy for each customer cohort depending on what the data was telling us.
One of the things I loved about how you talked through that, and I think this is something that, I work in SaaS, you work in SaaS, this is where our passion is. But it's interesting because I think, anytime we've been around the block enough now to see product and what good products look like and maybe where products are lacking, and then also the ability for product to innovate. And what I like about what you just did is you didn't actually mention product at all. You mentioned actually all the things that you could control and your teams can control. And I think like that mentality is just something that I always admire. I think because it kind of goes back to some of the stuff we were talking about earlier, but it's like kind of control the controllables. It's like, hey, these are the things that I can actually impact. Like you were talking about earlier with your perspective, like I can actually choose, I can take this as a challenge. It's the same concept here where you were like, there was nothing you just said where like, oh, we looked into it and we saw that onboarding actually was great, but the product itself sucks in this feature. Like you didn't mention that at all. And I think that's really interesting. And I think for some SaaS companies, like it's easy And don't be wrong, we all have those moments. I think frustration with product. I think we also, those of us who've been wrong long enough, like know how hard development is too. And so there's probably a little bit of thing there. But I don't know. I found it interesting that you went down the route more of like, here are some of the things that we can do to actually impact this versus, hey, we need the product to be better. That's the only way this is gonna be better. So I don't know, it's refreshing whenever I hear that kind of take and perspective on it as well.
Totally. Totally.
Talk a little bit like kind of one of the last things I want to dig into here. What's something you're energized about right now? Like you talked a lot today about your kind of growth within sales. You talked about some of the things you're learning about. You talked about like how you're kind of leading your teams. You talked about this whole thing around retention, which we could probably spend an entire, episode just talking through
Yeah.
retention itself. But what's something that right now you're just like, man, I am really energized by this thing that I'm either learning or that I'm like leading through or that I really wanting to see how this plays out? Like what would be something today you talk through on that end of it?
So currently Formstack's working on a new product that we're launching at the end of June that's geared towards more enterprise size customers. And what gives me energy is getting customer feedback and actually talking to them about the problem that this could solve. I think this gives the company a huge opportunity to not only increase our average customer value or and contract value, but also create a little bit more stickiness to the product. And I went to a Denver speed, it was called literally Denver speed dating event. I think it was just last week. It was speed dating for business. I've never been to an event like this. It was really cool. It was put on by a company called Kodi, Kodi. Anyway, there was 8 tables of prospects essentially, and you got to bring 2 people from your company. And those 2 people had 9 minutes, I think it was, at every single table to basically like pitch what you were doing. There was a networking event before, like a happy hour, and then you sat down and you got to pitch the product. And what energizes me is when you see a clear alignment on product market fit. I had a gentleman literally pull me aside and say, like, how do I sign up for this right now? Like, literally, how do I get in contact with you so that I can buy this for my company? And so that is the type of stuff that like gives me energy. Like, sitting and looking at dashboards and reports and all that kind of stuff. Like at this, at my heart, at my core, I am a sales person. And so humans give me energy, and human interaction and customer feedback gives me energy, even if it's negative. Sometimes like just being able to speak to our customers gives me energy. So yeah, I would say that's something that is giving me energy right now.
That's awesome. The speed dating, I've never heard of Cody, by the way. I have to look it up and I'm super fascinated by it. What like did you guys both did the other person you bring with you, like you both kind of sat down and pitched the stakeholders? Is that how that worked?
Yeah, I had no idea how it was gonna go. I'm like, this
Okay.
might be awkward. But yeah, I mean, they start the timer
Yeah.
and you introduce yourself and you say, okay, here's what it is, and here's the business that it solves. And then we would try to engage them and ask them questions. So we're not just pitching something for 9 minutes without understanding, like, is this resonating? Walk us through your challenges in this area. And then literally it's speed dating because after the event, you're not allowed to contact them. Okay. And then after the event, they rank you, like they mark, there's 3 options. Option is no, not interested. Option 2 is yes, I'm interested. Please schedule a meeting. Option 3 is yes, I'm interested, but I'm the wrong person. And I'm happy to introduce you to the right person. And so you kind of wait for your results. Like the partner and I who went together, we both left like, we felt like we had 6 really good conversations. Like hopefully they choose us. And actually it went great. All 6 of those chose us and everybody else didn't. And that's what I thought would happen. And so yeah, it was really cool. It was much more successful than going, well, maybe not much more successful. It was more fun
Yeah.
than going to like a big huge conference in Vegas where you talk to 1,000 people. And over the course of 3 days, it was an intimate, it's probably, I don't know, 40 people there total, including the vendor, or 50 maybe, including the vendors and the prospects. So yeah,
That's
it's
really
cool.
cool. I've never heard of that. It's funny, so we do a lot of events and definitely one of our main avenues. And was talking to somebody the other day about like they were going to an event recently. It was like 150 people, which it's funny, like in some terms you're like that's not very many, but if it's 150 people of like your target market, and again the quality of conversations you have, like probably similar here where it's like very focused, intimate, like versus this very transactional experience that are conferences and everybody's overwhelmed and tired and stayed out probably too late the night before, right? Like you just a different vibe and feeling behind it, so that's brilliant. I like it.
And that was the difference is what caught my eye because they were sort of prospecting me to be for us to be a vendor, and I forwarded it to our marketing team because the list of attendees was impressive. Like it was all IT executives basically, and that's our target market. And when they post the final list of those going, they literally send Ubers to go pick these people up and bring them to the event. Because that's why you sign up as a vendor is you get access, you don't get access to 300 people, you get access to 40, but they're all like people you want to be in front of that probably would take you, you know, weeks on your own to get access to, if not longer, by like networking your way through the organization and getting introductions and stuff like that. So it was very cool.
That's awesome. Well, hey, thanks so much for taking the time today. If you guys aren't following Emma on LinkedIn, feel free. I'll make sure I post the link on the post. And then if you haven't liked or subscribed to the podcast, please do. But Emma, thanks so much for joining. It was fun to talk through everything today.
Hit like, subscribe to continue to follow along as we get to impact change across our organizations in the industry. To the journey.